You walk through the silent halls of a palace that once ruled the richest kingdom in the Mediterranean. Outside, the Roman army controls the city. Inside, a queen waits for death. For centuries, people have repeated the same story. Cleopatra, desperate and defeated, brings a basket of figs into her chamber. Hidden inside is an asp, a venomous snake. She lets it bite her, choosing a dramatic and romantic death rather than surrender. It is a powerful image. A beautiful queen, a quiet chamber, a snake delivering a final, poetic escape. But almost everything about that story is likely wrong. And the truth is far more unsettling, because Cleopatra's final days were not a moment of romantic tragedy. They were a slow psychological siege, a carefully constructed trap designed by Rome's most calculating leader, a man who would soon rename himself Augustus and become the first emperor of Rome. For 10 days in August of 30 BCE, Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, was not simply waiting to die. She was being studied, measured, manipulated, and quietly broken. Not by chains, not torture, but by something far more effective, hope. To understand how Cleopatra really died, you have to step inside those final 10 days, when two powerful minds faced each other across a silent battlefield. One of them controlled the empire. The other had nothing left but her will. The collapse began on August 1st, 30 BCE. The city of Alexandria had already fallen. Octavian's legions had entered Egypt after defeating the forces of Mark Antony, Cleopatra's ally and lover, in the civil war that had consumed Rome. By the time the Roman army reached the palace district, the outcome was already decided. Mark Antony believed Cleopatra had betrayed him. Someone had told him she was dead. Desperate and humiliated, Antony fell onto his own sword. But the wound did not kill him immediately. He lingered, bleeding, conscious, slowly dying. Cleopatra, meanwhile, had retreated into a tomb she had ordered built near the temple of Isis. It was not simply a burial place, it was a fortress. The doors were sealed, treasure had been moved inside. She had taken refuge there with two loyal attendants, Iris and Charmian. When Antony's men carried the dying general to the tomb, Cleopatra refused to open the doors. Roman soldiers were already approaching. Opening the entrance would mean immediate capture. Instead, according to the ancient historian Plutarch, ropes were lowered from an upper window, and there, in one of history's strangest scenes, Cleopatra and her attendants pulled the wounded Antony upward through a narrow opening. His body bleeding, his strength fading, stone walls smeared with blood as they dragged him inside. Antony died shortly afterward in Cleopatra's arms. His final words were not about love. They were about defeat. He said he had once been the greatest of Romans, but he had been beaten by another Roman. Octavia. Cleopatra had only minutes to mourn before Roman soldiers surrounded the tomb. Most people imagine what happened next as a violent capture, but Octavian did something unexpected. He did not order the doors broken down. He did not storm the tomb. Instead, he sent a messenger to negotiate. While Cleopatra listened from inside, Roman soldiers quietly climbed the outer walls of the building. They entered through the same high opening that had been used to pull Antony inside. The Queen of Egypt never saw them coming. When they suddenly appeared, Cleopatra reached for a dagger. She attempted to stab herself. Immediately, she shouted that she would never be taken alive, never dragged to Rome, never displayed in chains. But the soldiers had strict instructions. Under no circumstances was Cleopatra allowed to die. They tackled her, disarmed her, restrained her, and they escorted her out of the tomb and transported her to the palace. From that moment forward, Cleopatra was not a prisoner in the traditional sense. She was a political asset, and Octavian needed her alive. Back in Rome, Octavian faced a problem. Technically, he had just won a civil war. Romans killing Romans. That was not a narrative that inspired celebration. But if he could frame the conflict differently, if he could convince the Roman public that the war had actually been against a dangerous foreign queen, then the victory became far more useful. Cleopatra became the perfect villain. An Eastern monarch, a seductress, a corrupting influence over Mark Antony, a woman who had supposedly tried to dominate Rome through manipulation. But for the story to work, one thing had to happen. Cleopatra had to appear in Octavian's triumph. A Roman triumph was not just a parade. It was a ritual of humiliation. Captured rulers were dragged through the streets in chains. The crowd mocked them, insulted them, watched them reduced to nothing. And at the end of the procession, the defeated leader was usually executed. Cleopatra knew this perfectly well. Years earlier, she had been in Rome when Julius Caesar celebrated his triumph. She had seen how another defeated ruler, Vercingetorix of Gaul, was paraded through the streets before being strangled. She understood exactly what Octavian intended, and that is why she tried to kill herself the moment Roman soldiers entered the tomb. But Octavian needed her alive. So the real battle began. Cleopatra was placed in a carefully chosen chamber inside the palace. Second floor. One door. A narrow window, too small for escape. Guards posted continuously. Everything that could be used as a weapon was removed. Her clothing and hair were searched every day. Even food was inspected. But Octavian was not relying only on physical security. He was building a psychological prison. Because keeping Cleopatra alive was not enough. He needed her willing to stay alive. And the way he achieved that was brutally simple. Her children. Cleopatra had 4. Caesarion. Her 17-year-old son with Julius Caesar, and 3 younger children fathered by Mark Antony. Alexander Helios. Cleopatra Selene. And Ptolemy Philadelphus. The moment Cleopatra was captured, the children were taken away. Separated. Hidden under Roman supervision. Then on the second day of captivity, a message arrived. Octavian wanted Cleopatra to know her children were safe. They were being cared for. Protected. But their future depended on her cooperation. If she behaved, they would live. If she died, their safety could not be guaranteed. For Cleopatra, the threat was clear. Caesarion was especially vulnerable. He was Julius Caesar's biological son. That made him a political danger to Octavian, whose authority depended on being Caesar's adopted heir. If Caesarion lived, he could become a rival. If Cleopatra died, Octavian would have every reason to eliminate him. But if she cooperated, maybe her children would survive. That was the trap, and it was brilliantly constructed, because Cleopatra now had 2 opposing instincts, one pushing toward death, the other pulling her toward survival. Over the next several days, the pressure intensified. Octavian sent architects, craftsmen. Officials. They began measuring Cleopatra's body. Her height. Her shoulders. The width of her arms. At first, she asked what they were doing. One of them answered casually. They were designing the display platform for Octavian's triumph. The cage needed to fit correctly. It was a quiet form of humiliation. She was being measured like furniture. But the real purpose was psychological. Every measurement carried a message. You are going to Rome. This is already decided. We are preparing the spectacle now. Day after day, the officials returned. They discussed details openly in front of her. Which clothing she would wear, which jewelry would look appropriate, how she would be positioned for the crowd. None of this was necessary. It was theater, designed to make the future feel inevitable. Meanwhile, Cleopatra remained almost completely isolated. Her attendants were held in separate rooms. She could sometimes hear them in distant corridors. But she was not allowed to speak with them. No advisors. No allies. No one to share the unbearable decision she was being forced to face. She repeatedly asked to see her children. Each request was refused, but sometimes she heard